Well, it's now 10:30, and that means it's time for Brainstorming the Human Connection, brought to you by the South Dakota Humanities Council. My name is Lawrence Diggs, and I will be your host and inquisitor today. And we will be talking about a very important subject that somehow seems to have gotten lost in our history books. And even when it's covered scantily or miscovered. So we're going to have a chance to speak with someone today who has spent some time studying about Sitting Bull, a unique character in American history and well underrepresented in all of the uh, hero stories that we have. My guest today is Norm Matteoni. I think I'm saying that right.
That's close
uh,
enough.
close enough.
Yeah.
well, tell me how you say it. I forgot.
Well, I say it Matteoni, other people say it Matteoni if you're
Yeah,
from Italy.
yeah. That's what I was trying to do. The Matteoni.
There you go.
Okay, so Norm, thanks for being with us. I think this is a very important topic, and I'm glad to have you to share your knowledge and insight on it. First, though, can you tell me something about yourself that will give us a context in which to listen to what you have to say?
Well, I'm a lawyer. I'm from California. I was born and raised in California, but I did go out of state to law school. I went to Notre Dame University in Indiana. I crossed the plains on maybe five, six occasions by car, going back and forth to school. I think that had some influence, although I didn't know it at the time, but seeing the country in the Great Plains. But the ingredient that caught me up with Sitting Bull was a quote by the chief that he gave to a Father de Schmidt, who was soliciting his signature on the Treaty of 1868, I should say, for Fort Laramie, resolving the war that Red Cloud led over the Bozeman Trail. And Sitting Bull would not sign the treaty. And he said, I wish all to know that I propose not to sell any portion of my country. As a lawyer, I represent people whose lands are being taken for public projects, eminent domain, and that just lingered with me and made me think. It's now a little plaque on the wall in my office, so I don't forget the quote. Um, but I think that's the catalyst that made me look at crossing the plains, and what I was always interested in is the history of California and the gold rush and the overland trail, people coming to Oregon, people coming to California, crossing, enduring great hardships and heroic venture. But it occurred to me there was another side to the story. And that's how I got involved and began studying this over 20 years ago.
I think that quote is very important, and it's one that we often overlook when we think about the interaction between new immigrants and the native people here. And that is, this was their country, this was their land. And then to put ourselves in that same position is like, what do we do? And there are many cases around the world where people have a homeland, and then some other people decide, oh, that would be nice for us, and usually not the whole people. It's usually a few people who want the real estate, who will then take advantage of the people that went and let's say absorbed all the arrows. If they, once they have it, then they rip those people off too. So that it's a subject that I'm always surprised that I didn't learn a lot about it. I mean, we had a lot of Native Americans in San Francisco where I grew up, And so we had some conversations, and I remember covering it, covering the Alcatraz. I was a newspaper reporter. I think somebody's thing is on. Um, I remember covering the Alcatraz repatriation attempt, and so a lot of stories came up then. People had interest in talking about it, but in school, no. We didn't really talk about it. So it doesn't surprise me that most of us are ignorant of the native people's um, side of that story, or the interaction with others and what it must make them feel. And I think you're right that that statement says a lot. What person wants to sell their country? Um, Tell us about your book.
Sure. Well, the book certainly focuses on Sitting Bull, but it's much more about we the people and the sins of we the people. And I'm one of we the people. The book focuses in some respect on the larger story of Sitting Bull. It's an attempt in the prologue, which is really called the Meadowlark Message. And the Meadowlark Message, by oral history of the Lakota, is that Sitting Bull was told by a meadowlark that he will be killed by his own people. That apparently happened in 1884, but the book is starting in 1890. And so it's a flashback. It provides an opportunity to put some of the backstory to Sitting Bull in place before we get to what I wanted to focus on, the last 20 days of his life. And so the first few chapters are having to set the context. There's this prologue of what's going to come and some backstory, and then we shift to the land, which always fascinates me. Again, the dispossession of land is a strong element of the book, and it's a strong element that drives Sitting Bull and his continued resistance and criticism of government policies. So the land is looked at next in terms of what was taking place in the summer of 1888, 1889, 1890. Harsh conditions in the Dakotas, drought conditions. It also talks about the confinement, because those 3 years are, 2 years, I should say, 88 and 89, the United States government has sent commissions to the Great Sioux Reservation to solicit votes for the sale of 9 million acres. Why? To provide land for settlers for the new states that are about to come in North Dakota and South Dakota. And Sitting Bull is the lead in resisting that. And he's successful in 88 with his people, advocating, no, we are not going to sell any more, I should say, of our country. He is not successful in the next year when the Crook Commission comes to solicit votes, and it's successful. And he continues to protest that. So he's a thorn in the government side. So that's another piece of the setting. But you have to look at the effect on all the people confined to the reservation because of the harshness of the condition, the loss of more land. They've already lost their way of life, dependent on the buffalo. They're now confined, and they're confined in an ever restricted area to be farmers, to be Christians. So then we shift to the impact of the ghost dance. And that comes from the West, comes from Nevada, state next to California, and a Paiute prophet, Wavoka, who preaches. Actually, he's asking the people to pray for their own redemption, that Christ is found that the white population has not lived up to their Christian principles, and finally Christ is going to come and help lift the red man up. So it's a powerful message that he's preaching, an evangelical message. And that message moves across the country from west to east, and it comes to the Lakota. And so that's the next key piece of the story to get to Thanksgiving time, when we now focus on the impact of the criticism and the reaction of the government to Sitting Bull and what takes place thereafter. And how it is written in the newspapers is the other critical element to the story. And that's, you see, each chapter begins with a quote from the newspaper of the day. It's both to give you a sense of time moving very quickly over the period of Thanksgiving, or the week before Thanksgiving, to December 15th, when Sitting Bull is killed. So the clock is ticking. You can hopefully I've written it, that you can feel this impending prediction coming. That's the scope of the book in a few minutes.
And the book is called A Phantom Storm, Sitting Bull, America, and the Ghost Dance. And that's, of course, by Noam Matteoni. So let's look at the Ghost Dance. What is the Ghost Dance, and why did they have it, and why is it a thing?
The Ghost Dance, well, I think we have to go back to Wovoka's place of origin in Nevada. Wovoka was a Paiute, as I said. His people went through what the Lakota are going through in the Dakotas in the 1880s, earlier in Nevada, that they're being dispossessed of their land. Why? Part of it is the California gold rush, but in Nevada, silver is king. And so there's silver mining, and there's a great flood of miners to the Nevada area. And again, natives are in the way of this reaping of wealth from the land of Nevada. And his people are displaced, and by the time he's growing up, he's no longer able to follow his traditional ways of his people. He lives with a family on a ranch, a white family, and he becomes Christianized. They have the Bible readings, talk their faith at meals. He goes to church, and yet he knows of his people and the hardships that they're facing. His father is also a preacher, and so he looks at Christianity, he looks at the native religion of his people, and he finds a way to blend that, and he finds a way to give an uplifting message. Scott Momaday, the Lakota writer of great fame, said it was a desperate prayer. It is asking for help in a new world that the people are put into in their own country. It's not in their control anymore. Their life is vanishing, but their life has meaning, and they're asking for recognition, and they believe that Christ is now ready to recognize them and will lift them up. In that message, he does not talk war. He talks that you're going to have to work hard to adapt. We know we have to adapt, but God's going to lift up the red man and diminish the white man. There's that message, that hint of some militancy in that statement. Well, native tribes through Utah, crossing the Rockies, hear this message by word of mouth of what is taking place, and they go and they visit Wovoka. They receive the message and carry it home. The Lakota are one of the last to do that, but they do that in 1888, 1889, and they bring it to the reservations. And thus, you need to look at the hardship of what they're suffering at that period of time. As I said, they've lost their way of life in following the buffalo. There's great sickness. The government has cut back ration allotments in 1888, 1890, against what Crook promised the Lakota in trying to get their signatures for the sale of land. And at least as a side note, Crook is honorable. He goes back to Washington and says, you owe these people these rations. Crook dies in March of 1890, not able to push his government to fulfill the delivery of rations. So the situation in the Great Sioux Reservation, or the remnants of it, Standing Rock, Cheyenne River, Pine Ridge, Rosebud, Lower Brule, is very depressed. So the religion has great appeal that we are people of worth. God knows we're a people of worth. That's the basis of the ghost dance. And then the Lakota add an element, because Wovoka said, it's not one prayer. You adapt to your particular tribal understanding of your creator on what I'm telling you. So they introduced the ghost shirts. And the ghost shirts symbolically are to repel any bullet that may be shot toward these people. Really? I don't think so. I think it was more, just as their shields in battle had totems painted on it, these shirts had totems painted on it. And yes, it was a spiritual protection, but everybody knew a bullet could go through Muslim cloth. But now, what became a curiosity to the American public, the ghost dance, what is it? And there were people from Shadron, Nebraska, going up on a weekend excursion at Pine Ridge to see the ghost dance in September, October. But it's beginning to shift from a curiosity as the newspapers jump on this, as Sitting Bull is identified as a leader of the ghost dance. And we know Sitting Bull is a bad Indian. So this is up to no good. There can be a rebellion coming on the reservation. So now we see the newspapers jump on the topic, not as a Sunday article of curiosity about a new religion, but a militant new religion, something that is not going to be good for the people in the Dakotas and the Wyoming and Nebraska. The governor of South Dakota sends a request to Washington for arms for the citizens so that they can form a militia to protect themselves against this coming rebellion. Let me stop there so you can direct me how you want to go.
Okay, well, I think this is an interesting story, and I think one of the turning factors, and one that I certainly was completely unaware of, and that is that this Paiute has brought Christianity, which was brought to him, and now he uses it to say, hey, look, you're not following your own religion. You've converted me to your religion. I've converted from my religion to your religion, but now I find out that you don't believe in your religion either. It's like you're asking me to believe in something that you don't believe in, or at least you don't act on it. And now I'm saying, well, maybe if this God is real, he's going to turn on you and support me. And if it's not real, why am I following this?
Well,
I
that's a
mean,
good way of putting it. That's very much involved in what I think would be the mental process of people who are now dominated by the white race. Now, strike that word. It was from the Pilgrims forward, all the way across the country, a dominant race is going to take what is manifestly their right of destiny, coast to coast of this country. So it has happened over and over again, and these people are well aware of that heavy hand, and with the guidance of Christianity. It's interesting that President Grant was known as a peace president to the Native Americans, that he shifted from his Civil War background to trying to provide assistance, but the assistance was influenced by Christianity. He put Quakers in charge of reservations. Is that bad? No. But then it evolves that each reservation, at least on the Lakota territory, is one domination or another, be it Catholic, Episcopalian, Congregationalist. They're assigned one of those reservations, and their goal is to not adapt the religion of the native, but to convert them to Christian belief. Sitting Bull himself was solicited many times on that front. He, as I said, had a conversation with DeSmet. And the interesting aspect of it is DeSmet came from Montana into North Dakota, the far reach of North Dakota, to find Sitting Bull to get him to sign to the treaty. He came with a banner of the Blessed Mary. And as he came, certainly he was noted by Sitting Bull's people, the warriors. Hey, there's some guy coming, this Jesuit priest, waving a banner. We're not interested in talking with him. Sitting Bull said, no, we'll talk with him. Sitting Bull invited him into his lodge. He spent 2 days talking to him. DeSmet gave Sitting Bull a crucifix. And if you look at the cover of the book, Sitting Bull in the photograph of 1885 is wearing a crucifix. We could talk about that for a long time, of the implications of that. But my short understanding of that is that Sitting Bull did not resist talking about religion, but he continued to maintain his own. And he told in Reservation Life, Mary Collins, a missionary, a Congregationalist missionary, you have your God, I have mine. I understand what you're saying. I'm not opposed to your religion, but respect mine.
yeah. And that's something that people seem to have a hard time doing, reconciling their faith ends at the end of their nose, and it's all for them, and other people can support them. But the idea that, well, if my God is real, yours can't be, is one that a lot of people struggle with. So I want to open it up at this point to the other participants and panel members. Anyone have questions, comments, insights that they would like to share at this time? This is actually an interactive program, so we look forward to your interaction. Vicki, you look like you're trying to say something.
I do. I just don't have my computer set up right. I'm not sure where the video's going. I think, can you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you fine. You're blurred, but your voice is.
Sorry. I think that you know, you think of the Ark of the Covenant and they took it into battle. And from the very beginning, in Christianity, we have the fall. I'm not sure what the fall is like for other religions, but I think it's impossible, considering the nature of man, to live in peace. And it doesn't seem, what I know about history, that we can live in peace, and that we have a propensity to kill each other. And that's a new thing for me. And I don't know if there are other examples of people actually tolerating someone from another culture that's so different from their own. And to me, it's kind of wishful thinking. It's a terrible thing. But when you said that we weren't honoring our own religion, I think you could say that for any religion. I mean, we've been fighting since day one. And I don't think that's the answer. Not sure what the answer is, but I just don't believe that humans can live in peace with other people that are so different. They have a fear of the difference, and therefore they kill, or they want to be superior, and they want to, it's a power thing that we have, and I don't see much hope for us. It's a terrible thing. I guess that's all I have to say.
Well, to respond to that, I have lived in a country where people not only tolerate other religions, but are often members of 2 or more religions. And they go to the services of those other religions, and they don't see a contradiction. And they think of proselytizing as something completely bizarre. It's like if that religion appeals to you, if the person or the product of that religion appeals to you, then you go and say, hey, you've got something that seems to be working for you. I'd like to have some of that too. And people fight. They will fight, and they have had wars, and they have wars over different things, but it's not religion. They don't. And today you can see, and the country I'm speaking of is Japan. You can see mosques, synagogues, Christians of all kinds. And before the advent of other religions coming into Japan, they had Buddhism, and they had Shintoism. Now, the Buddhist sects, they sometimes fought against each other for power, and that was usually something having to do with one shogun wanting one, and another daimyo wanting something else. But the people, it's like, okay, well, if that works for you, it works for you. And I would say that usually when you have those wars, even religious wars in other countries, it's a few psychopaths who prime and get everybody excited and sort of rile people up. Most people, as you pointed out before, Vicky, they just want to go and do their thing, and if unless your religion says you go to hell for the other people's sins, nobody cares. It's like, okay, that's your worst case scenario. It's like you don't follow the way, and you burn in hell. I told you, but hey, you didn't listen. That's the end of it. And I think that's what Christ said, but I don't want to get into my religious rap here. Anybody else have insight that they want to share?
I wanted to ask a question. It kind of points something out. In reading your book, Norm, I think it brought about to me like the reality that the way this was posed to sell it basically was that these ghost dancers were militant, when really all they were using was the prayer that was introduced, Christian prayer that was introduced to them to survive. And they ended up, the General Miles ended up like creating propaganda out of this whole thing to sell the use of military force against them. And it's just bizarre to me and tragic.
Yeah, there's lots of influences when you mention Miles. Miles at times very much recognized that these people were suffering from hunger. They were suffering from lack of the rations that were promised them. They were in a very depressed state. And if you push people to hunger, if they have any strength, they're going to resist. But his motivation was he's a very ambitious military man. And during this period of time, he was considering running for the presidency of the United States. He also was the head of the Frontier Army. And the Frontier Army is in decline by 1890. Supposedly, the frontier disappeared in 1890. In any event, the Indian Wars are over. And the ascendancy of the Navy on the part of the United States is now the focal point, because the United States is interested in trade with the Far East and patrolling the Pacific and the like. So he's a conflicted man, and there's an opportunity when Indian agents, such as Daniel Royer on the Pine Ridge Reservation, is saying there's crazy Indians dancing with rifles on their backs, and they won't abide by any of the rules of reservation life. We need the military here to enforce this because the Indian police aren't effective. So Miles takes advantage of that, really. But nonetheless, he goes to Washington in early December. And again, in an interview with the press, the Washington Star, Evening Star, says these people are suffering hardships, and that's driving them to a religion. We got to take care of that. But he does not object, because when he's going to Washington, that's the time that the Senate is debating over sending arms to the Dakotas at the request of the governor. And of course, they do send the arms. So it's always a conflicting situation, and the newspapers want to pick up on the militancy. But in contrast, the failure to observe and understand that religion is very striking, because Indian agent McLaughlin, who does have his major differences with Sitting Bull, goes to Grand River, where the ghost dance takes place on his reservation. He talks with Sitting Bull. He observes it. He doesn't write anything of Indians dancing with rifles on their back. He invites Sitting Bull to come to the reservation and let's further talk about this. And Sitting Bull puts McLaughlin off. Yeah, give me a week or two and I'll come in. Of course, he never comes in. But McLaughlin, who writes scurrilous comments about Sitting Bull, does not say anything about the militancy on his reservation in the fear that there's going to be some outbreak, nor does anybody else except Royer. And the newspaper picks this up about the Indians dancing with rifles on their back. Their rifles are very few. Their rifles are hunting rifles. The game is gone. These people are not armed. But nobody looks at that. As you look at the newspaper accounts in November, in December, Sitting Bull's reaching out to Quanah Parker in Oklahoma to solicit his support for a grand rebellion. Sitting Bull is not allowed to leave his reservation, but somehow the newspapers find that he's reached out to Oklahoma. He's reached out to Canada, where he was in exile for several years after Little Bighorn, to rile up the Native Americans there that are going to cross the border and join him. None of that is reality. There is no ghost dance war, but it sells papers.
That is a recurring theme. It's like all kinds of atrocities are perpetrated by someone getting a press insight, creating a story that creates a completely illusionary story. And then, everything from the Bear Republic, the taking of Hawaii, and all of those things often start with people just making stuff up, making up a problem as a pretext for other people to take land. And then it almost seems like the real estate agents, the real estate business is at the base of every problem that we have in this area. But whatever the story is, it's usually propped up by some people who make heroes out of villains. The Alamo, the Bear Republic, as I mentioned, Hawaii, all of those things, you can go back and people are saying, no, this is not a problem. This is not a problem. But the newspapers are saying it sells newspapers, the people are standing in the way of progress. Whose progress? It's an interesting repeating story. Anyone else has any other comments, questions?
I do want to know, Norm, were people unaware that Sitting Bull was unable to leave the reservation? I mean, he didn't pick up his cell phone and call Canada and say, hey, this is what's going on. So did people not realize he couldn't leave the reservation and this was all made up? Or was it all really kept quiet that he was accounts.
Like, no, not according to the newspaper accounts, but there were contemporaries of his that were allowed to leave because they went from the reservation to visit Wovoka. He never left. McLaughlin kept a tight rein on him. He had people watching him at Grand River. So Grand River is the location of where Sitting Bull's camp was, or compound. It's 40 miles away from the agency headquarters at Fort Yates. And McLaughlin allowed Sitting Bull to move away from agency headquarters, but he sent people to watch him. Bullhead is the head of the Indian police, and Bullhead lives a couple of miles from Sitting Bull on the Grand River. So if you wanted to inquire and get the facts, you could find out, but that's not what was portrayed. It's again, the image is created and the repetition of it is the reality that's not reality.
I think it's worthwhile mentioning too, that the undercurrent of all of this is still a very strong, let's say, sector. Not everybody, certainly, but there's a very strong sector who's really in favor of genocide. They see that as the solution. And so that's why you try to starve people to death. So you try to make it look like it's a natural phenomenon. Hey, we put them out in the Black Hills, not the Black Hills, but on the Badlands, and they couldn't take care of themselves. That's a natural attrition. So with all of this, I always think in the background, there's some people who just actually want to exterminate these people. And then the other things are almost like a cover up of it,
One other thing I just wanted to put in, it's short. It is not women that are going to war. It's mainly men. And I think we should think a little bit more about that. Women are not doing most of the killing. So what is that about? That's all.
Well, I'm not sure how to answer that, except what it strikes me to think about. And again, I'm an outsider. I'm a Californian of European descent. I'm not Native American, but the leadership of what I see for Native Americans these days is in women. They are more educated than their men. They're very forceful. They are at the lead of the resistance on the pipeline issue, going through Standing Rock. So it's not the same comments you made, Vicki, but I think the strength of the Native Americans today lies in their women and following the lead of the women.
I did hear at one point when I was reading that before the men went to war, they always spoke with the women first as to getting permission to go to war. I don't know if that's true or not.
I'm not sure either, but I would think you would cling to your mom and want to hold that memory before you go to war because there's a protection in that. There's just an emotional feel about that.
I think that there's a certain respect too that people overlook because we're looking through a lens that's not representative of actually the day-to-day feelings of people and how they organize themselves, because we have limited, let's say, contact with people, but you see lots of references where people refer to many different native tribes as matriarchies, where women do have specific power. And so I don't know that it's an overlay of how we think of them today, or if that is how accurate our sense of who, in air quotes, was in charge of what, But that said, Sharon has something to say. But you have to turn on your mic, though.
Part of the liturgy, I guess. I haven't read the book yet because I haven't even known about the book, but how did you, there's always a problem of a white person writing about someone who is not white. And how did you skirt that issue? Did you approach it like, this is our common history, whites and Native Americans, or did you not even think about it? Maybe?
No, I think about it a lot. And part of it is what you just said, that it's a common history. We're at cross purposes, and we were trying to, as white people, Christian white people, saying, we're going to help you assimilate, have the advantages we have. I think some people believe that at the time, but I think that was also something of a fiction, a balm for the conscience of these people in Christianizing the Native American. The Native American wasn't going to immediately become a citizen and have the full rights of anybody else in the country. So there's a white supremacy aspect to what took place in 1890. There's no question about that, we're the superior race. These people are heathens. They compromised the Christian religion, villainizing Sitting Bull. He led the massacre of Custer. He's not adapting. He's living in the past. And so the issue, as the Native Americans came to the end of the century in 1900s, was whether they were going to vanish or completely submit. So yes, I think about that a lot. And what I tried to write is a story that is not simply about Sitting Bull. I'm not capable of telling you the culture of his people and all the influences of his thinking. I can read about it in history. I can relate to it as I understand humanity. But I was trying to tell a story of our reaction and how wrong we were, because we didn't take the extra step to understand these people. We dominated these people. They were savages. And if you go back to 1868, a French military officer serving in the United States Army, fighting in the Red Cloud War over the Bozeman Trail, said of Sitting Bull as early as 1868 that he is the most vile and ill-tempered Indian in the Dakotas. He was always villainized. And what was he doing? He was resisting the intrusion in his lands of another people. But he was singled out, and he continued to be singled out. So Sitting Bull was standing in the wings and a convenient villain to the story that America wanted to tell in 1890. He didn't command any forces. Standing Rock, by the words even of James McLaughlin, was not having any serious problems. The problem was Sitting Bull. And Sitting Bull and McLaughlin didn't get along. McLaughlin found that a convenient situation to have Sitting Bull removed from the reservation. That's all McLaughlin was doing. His reservation was never occupied by the Army, as Pine Ridge was, as Rosebud was. Even on the occupation of those two reservations, what happened? The Indians fled, some of them, as Lawrence said, into the Badlands. Nobody resisted the occupation on November 20 of that year of the military forces coming into the reservations to the south. No, nobody fired a shot.
I think Laniko had something she wanted to say.
Yes, good morning. I'm so sorry I came in late. I was busy.
We forgive you.
Okay, thank you. I just wanted to go back to what was said earlier about women and their role in leadership in any society. I grew up in a family where the women were pretty strong people, and they were the ones who pretty much made it possible for so many things to happen in our home. As I grew up, I began to learn a little bit more about other people, other cultures, and there seems to be let's talk it this way about the genders, male and female. You look at the animal insect population, and you discover that it's the life-giving force that is with the women, with the female. And just look at any bee colony, which is basically like a human community of its own. When you look at the role of man and their what they're doing in these, not necessarily men, but males, throughout society and the various societies, the various nations that we call insect, tree, whatever, there seems to be a function of territorial dominance for a period of time to establish the ongoing species, even if it is human. And once that's established and there's no role for the male is kind of a rogue villain in that community. And I hate to say this, but you look at all the problems that we're having in this country and other countries, we have circumstances where the rogue male is leadership without any role in war. If you think about it, the leaders are without a weapon. They're in an office. They're dictating what military activity is taking place and determining what the future is based on what they think is a proper exercise of their power. So I just want you to know that I grew up in a tribal community where it was referred to through history as bands. So we grew up with understanding that men were of bands. And on my mother's side, the women who led, obviously through the council, etc., they were clans. So you have these very different ways of history differentiating how the oppressed individuals are being labeled. And I find that when we continue to perpetuate these labels, we get stuck. We're stuck in a social dynamic or a paradigm or whatever you want to call it that has not allowed the community to rise up with the power of civility. So that's my spiel for today.
Thank you for your spiel. Wonderful spiel. I want to say that you bring up a very interesting point, Nico, and that is one of how language limits us and guides us into what we think. You know, we often think, well, I think something, I say it, but the inability of a language to express what we feel, and also especially in translations, when translations go approximate and there are all kinds of, let's say, subtleties and nuances in the original word, and then it's translated and that nuance is lost and sometimes completely changed, then we get words that don't represent what the thinking was. And before we know it, a lot of arguments are basically because we have not, one, been honest about what we really are trying to say, but moreover, or just as much, we are not able to say what it is because we don't have the words, or the translations are bad, etc. I think that is one of the things that we do. We give too much power to words, and we really think that we're communicating an idea, which often goes lost.
Lawrence, what are the words, "as long as the river shall run and the grasses shall grow," mean that was
Yeah.
to the Lakota to sign the treaties? What do
Yes, right.
those words mean?
Exactly. And we have so many cases in history that people have signed a treaty and or made a promise or said something that the person who's saying it has one meaning and the person hearing it has a whole nother meaning. And I'm not sure that's very good communication, you know. But we are under the illusion that we are communicating, and that is the real problem. If we recognize that, you know, we're saying this, but it's kind of like this, but, you know, there's a lot of room for, did you really mean that? You know, and almost nobody, pet peeve, almost nobody asks a person, what did you actually mean by that word? You know, it's almost like we're afraid to do that. And there's so many words that have meanings that none of the participants have agreed on.
When the Great Sioux Reservation was created in 1868, there were lands for the unceded throughout the Powder River country, a lot of the Black Hills, and then south into Nebraska. The Nebraska lands were hunting lands, and the language given for how long those hunting lands would last, as long as the buffalo justified the chase, the government wrote into the treaty at the same time that they're hunting the buffalo to extinction.
Mhm.
So, you know, the life of the Lakota was based on the buffalo. Oh, well, that's forever. No, that's not forever. That's not the way it was meant.
Yep. And the interesting thing is, like, not only in this case, but throughout the history of that exchange, of how people not only misunderstood, but often exploited the inability to communicate something, knowing, you know, putting trick words in, knowing that they plan to change something later. And so that part of the treaty would be null and void. It's not only that, that's a good example, but it's not only that. We can find numerous cases. And going back to the beginning of this conversation, all of these people are saying that God's on their side. You know, it's like, what? You know. So anyway,
So you've listened to a lawyer who's supposed to be a master at trickery in words. I'll put that disclaimer as we're about to finish out there.
well, I classify myself as a wordsmith. Most of my life, most of my occupations have been dealing with trade in words in some way or another. And I can say, especially in the last 5 or 10 years, I have become completely disillusioned with the ability of words to communicate. It's just that I've been so incompetent at other ways of communication that I feel like I have to start all over now and search for ways to communicate things that there are no words for that, or the words are like so jumbled that meanings are so jumbled that they mean nothing. Um, we're down in our last 5 minutes. Can you give us a synopsis of why you think what the evidence shows, as they say, Sitting Bull was killed, and what does that mean for us today?
Well, he was killed because the country needed a villain identified as leading this supposed outbreak on the reservation, the challenge of the United States government. And so he was a constant critic of the government, and the government certainly wanted his voice suppressed. They were doing good things, not only in the name of Christianity for these people, bringing them to a better understanding and a better world in our mind, we the people's mind, but they were taking care of them, and he was criticizing those policies. He was asking that their cultural background be recognized, that their rights be recognized, and let us work together. We have a say in the direction of our life. That's underlying it, but the key point, it was in a letter that McLaughlin wrote, just going word after word of criticism of Sitting Bull, that in that letter, he was saying Sitting Bull is disruptive to what we're trying to accomplish in assimilation. He has to be removed. I'm not saying that McLaughlin was intending that he be killed, but he sent his own people to arrest him, and that arrest went bad. The arrest really wasn't planned well. It was to be under cover of darkness before dawn broke. They figured out how to circle around the camp so it wouldn't alert people, come in along the backside of the Grand River and then cross the river to Sitting Bull's cabin, pound on the door, break in, pull him out and take him out and back to Fort Yates. But they really didn't think out the program, and that there would be, nonetheless, with that kind of activity in the early morning and dogs barking, the rest of the camp is alerted and they come to the defense of Sitting Bull. And there you have the confrontation, the escalation, the arguments, the shouting back and forth, and a gun goes off, and another gun and another gun, and Sitting Bull's lying in a pool of blood. And what do we do now? And so what do we do now is he's brought back, he's buried in a hidden area of, maybe hidden is the wrong word, but a remote corner of Fort Yates burial cemetery. He's not given any recognition of Lakota rights. The other people, the Indian police that are brought back that have been killed, are given Christian ceremony. They're heroes. They're recognized. He's not. He's diminished as far as the government can. And yet, over 100 years later, 2012, Time magazine names Sitting Bull as one of the most influential Americans in our history, one of the 100 most influential. And so, to sum up, I think he does have a lasting legacy. It's manifest in the women that are at the forefront on the resistance in Standing Rock to the pipeline intrusion on their lands. it's manifest in a rising of the Native Americans, I believe, in the last 20, 30 years, or since the occupation of Alcatraz, that we recognize these people and begin to examine their lives and what they mean, and give them not their full opportunity yet if they're confined to the reservation. They're still in an impoverished situation, but as you and I have talked, Lawrence, people say, I never heard this. And when I grew up and taking classes, why didn't we hear about this side of history? And I'm one of those people that I thought the march across the country to California was a grand excursion. And Indians be damned. I guess got in the way and pushed them out of the way. There were a few skirmishes, so what? And then you begin to read more and more that there is a complete other side of the story.
Thank you so much for this interesting conversation. I hope our other guests have gleaned some of the knowledge that is so important for us to get. I will see you next week, same time, same station.
Lawrence, thank you for the opportunity to visit with you and your friends.
Okay, bye. Bye.